back in the 90s, I can remember my family getting our first PC, like our first family PC. It was in the late 90s, and one of the first things, of course, that I thought about was games. Like, how am I going to play games on this? My experience with gaming before was definitely strictly consoles. I remember having a Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and, you know, just around that time is what I'm saying. Because I had the other stuff, a Super Nintendo and a Sega. You upgrade by the time we've gotten to this point. I remember having those, but like, you know, PC, like getting a computer, that was, it was crazy because before, we had like dial-up internet, you know, AOL internet, but before I would go to the library, the public library in my city, and that's how I would look up like cheat codes, or, you know, I was a fucking kid, so I'd be looking up like pictures of video games and fucking cheat codes, printing them off for the games that I had. We'd play RuneScape at the library, you know, but getting your own PC meant, you know, opening up those options a lot more. I remember one of my friend's dads was really into EverQuest at the time, and I just... I was obsessed with trying to play them. Now that might have been a little bit later, but I just remember that a lot growing up, just my friend's dad being super into EverQuest, and I'm always wanting to play it with them, so much that I ended up, you know, getting my own copy, and I would wake up really early in the mornings and play EverQuest before I had to go to school, and anybody else would want to use the computer. I'd hog that fucking thing. But I digress. Where I lived, I had a friend across the street. I remember when I first moved there, it was a guy about my age, and I saw him every once in a while coming in and out of his house, and when I moved to that area, you know, I was probably in 5th grade when I moved there. So introducing yourself to new people at that age, kind of daunting task, but I ended up, you know, going there, making friends, having a good time. But his older brother would introduce me to Fallout. Now, I'm not saying I was in 4th or 5th grade when I first played Fallout, but I remember around the time I was just getting to know this guy, or maybe I'd been his friend for a while, they had a PC as well, and his older brother and his friend, we can call them Jonathan and Jimmy, they had Fallout on the PC, and they would often be playing it when I would come over, and I would always watch and always be really excited to see them play Fallout. There was a couple of other games that they played on PC, Sim Ant, Sim Tower. There was this Mafia style game where, like, there was, you know, supers of the building, like superintendents of the building, and you had to go and deal with stuff. That was a really fun game too. I just don't remember the name of it. But Fallout and Fallout 2 were games that they played a lot of. And I remember Jimmy, my friend's older brother's friend, being really into the lore aspects of Fallout. And this was before YouTube and before wide access to the internet. So all the stuff that this guy knew about Fallout, like, he learned himself by playing the games and just retained the information, which isn't like some amazing feat or anything, but back then he was like my source of knowledge on Fallout. So as Jonathan would be playing the game, I would ask Jimmy, like, oh, you know, what's this about? What's the vaults? What's that? You know? And I just remember being so fucking just immersed in the story of Fallout. And the gameplay, it was something like I'd never played before. I hadn't played really any RPGs at all. The games I had been playing before that were like Tony Hawk and Super Mario and Mario Kart. Wrestling games like WWF 2000, WrestleMania 2000 on the Nintendo 64, No Mercy. Fucking amazing games. But that's what I was playing. Then in comes Fallout, man. And of course I had played Doom on PC. I had played, you know, the classics, Rainbow Six, the first Rainbow Six. You know, just the normal things that you would play. Theme Hospital. The classics, Roller Coaster Tycoon, DX Ball. Things of that nature. But Fallout was a game changer for me. I had never really played a RPG. I'd seen them, you know, like Final Fantasy and stuff like that. But this was different. This wasn't like Final Fantasy at all. And though it was turn-based and, all of those things, back then it was just that you would play a game, and that's just the way the game was. You didn't really relate it to every other game that's out there and do a quick Google search of games that are like it. And, you just kind of, okay, here's this game. I'm going to take it home. I'm going to play it. I'm going to experience it. Maybe you were lucky enough to catch a review. Maybe you were lucky enough that in the game store there was a magazine that, like I said, would review it. But most of the time, I wouldn't necessarily say you were going in blind, but you definitely could be fooled by games. Games would say that they were something or advertise a certain way. You would go to play them, they wouldn't be at all what they advertised. And I know that still happens today, but it was easier to do on large scales back then, for obvious reasons. Obviously, it's much harder to do now with the internet, things like that. But with Fallout, I just remember putting it in. I borrowed the first, I believe I borrowed Fallout 2 first. I always get confused on which one I actually played first. But I believe I borrowed the second one, and back then I was able to get a shitty old, it was an old computer, even for back then, a shitty old computer that I was able to put in my room, and I installed Fallout on it. And how old this computer was I don't know exactly how big Fallout was as a game size. I'm sure it hasn't changed, so if you have a copy of it, you can see, or even look it up, I'm sure. But there was like maybe a megabyte left, if that, on my computer after I installed it. Like, only Fallout would fit on this computer, but I just played it all the time. And of course, we still had that family computer out in the living room, and that would get tied in because I eventually ended up buying the double pack that had Fallout 1 and 2 in it. And I just fell in love with these games. And so much so, like, I've stated in other videos, like, I would write, not necessarily fan fiction like we know it today, but I would write out the plots of the games. Even on, past being a kid, like, I would get detention a lot in middle school and in elementary school, but mainly in middle school. I spent the majority of my 7th and 8th grade in in-school suspension, or in-school detention, whatever you want to call it. We called it ISS, in-school suspension. And what that essentially meant was that you were in the detention room, during the time period they allotted, and I racked up a lot of days. So most of the time I just hung out in there. And while I was in there, I had a composition notebook. And in that composition notebook, to pass the time, I would just from memory start writing the plot of Fallout 1 and then into Fallout 2. And I would just do that all the time. And I remember after a couple of weeks of me doing this, I went and I turned it into the supervisor of the detention. And she was like looking through it because neither one of us had anything to do. And I wasn't necessarily a troubled child. I wasn't, in there being a dick to her or whatever. I was nice to people. And there's just something about me in school. It just didn't mix. But she would thumb through this and she was like, oh, this is really good. This is really cool. This is a good story. And I'd tell her about the games and be like, yeah, this is all from a video game. And, this is a game I'm really into. So it's always occupied a large portion of my thought process. Fallout has taken a huge part of my life, just to my heart. I don't know how you would say that. It's just always been something I've been completely obsessed with. And I don't want to say obsessed in the sense of, how people obsess over celebrities or, that kind of stuff that you see. But I've just loved it forever. And I stated in a video earlier, one of the last videos that I made, that I can't remember a time that I wasn't a fan of Fallout. And I really can't. I can't remember ever just, I don't even remember it not being around. And the same can be said for a few other series. I really enjoyed the Metal Gear Solid series. Something about the Metal Gear Solid series really struck a chord with me when I was a kid. And when I played the first Metal Gear Solid, I just was completely thrown into that universe, and I loved every bit of it. But Fallout has always... I remember when I was younger, in the 90s. Well, late 90s. Let's say early 2000s, late 90s. People didn't know about Fallout, man. And to see Bethesda turned it into one of the most popular game franchises in the world. That's incredible, and it's really cool to see, because I do like the Bethesda games. I've been critical of them before, and I'll continue to be critical of them because I love these games and I want them to be good. And yes, sometimes just because I think something would be good doesn't necessarily mean it would be, but hey, and I don't think there's any harm in expressing those opinions. But it doesn't mean I don't like the games. I like Fallout 3, I like New Vegas, and I even like Fallout 4 to an extent. There's parts of all of those games that I don't like, but overall, I love the Fallout series, and I like Bethesda games. And, you know, funny enough, the first Bethesda game I ever played was Fallout 3. I didn't play any of the Elder Scrolls. I played Oblivion after I played Fallout 3. And then, you know, obviously Skyrim was a big deal, so everybody has played that. But yeah, you know, I didn't even really know of Bethesda until I heard that they bought the rights to Fallout 3, and then I was interested because I'm like, hey, Fallout, what's going on over here? And then, you know, I loved it. So, you know, yeah, I received a comment on a video saying, hey, you know, where's the video where you talk about how you got into Fallout? And I noticed that I've talked about the story, or like this story that I just told, a few times in videos, but there was nothing like, oh, hey, this is why I got into Fallout. So I wanted to make the video. It's not, you know, one of these super edited ones or scripted or anything like that. This is just, I wanted to talk to you guys about how I got into Fallout. How I've been obsessed with it, like I've talked about before. Me and my friend, who ended up being the best man at my wedding, when I got married, we would run around at barter fairs. They were dusty, tinted barter fairs that my parents would go to, and we'd run around in zigzag patterns to pretend like we were in Fallout. Because back then, with the isometric games, if you go somewhere, most of the time your character would run in a zigzag across the map because of the way the hexes work in the game. So just little stuff like that, like bottle caps. I've always collected bottle caps. I've had a crazy bottle cap collection. I have like a fraction of them. I got saved from when I moved before, and it's still way too many. I just have a ton of bottle caps. None of them are like Nuka-Cola or anything, though I do want to buy some Nuka-Cola ones. Those are cool. I've seen some cool ones on Etsy. But, you know, just bottle caps in general. I just love Fallout. I have the bobbleheads in my office here. It's just, I just never connected with a game since that I liked more. I like the setting. I like the idea, at least with the first two Fallouts, I like the idea that the world ended and you would expect people to maybe rebuild, but in this universe, like just the way technology went, being stuck in the 1950s and getting flash frozen there because of the bombs dropping in this Americana 1950s, 1960s style universe. I just love it so much. And it's really cool to see so many other people connect with it as well, post Bethesda. A lot of people think that, you know, as a classic Fallout fan, I act as some kind of gatekeeper. If you didn't like the first two Fallouts, how dare you? But I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's great that any of the games got you into the universe, because I think the setting and the universe are so great. Regardless of where people think it's going, regardless of what happened with spin-off games like 76, it's still you can't erase the past, and those games are going to stick with me forever. They're just fantastic. So this is just a short little video telling you about how I got into Fallout and why I love it. I just love it. So thank you for the comment. I hope that answered your question, and I was glad to share that with you guys. So let's get into talking about my lovely Patreonoids and YouTube channel members. These are people who pledge $5 or more to the YouTube channel. And they are as follows: Jake Russell, Hoppin' Soda, Nathaniel, Skylar Masterson, Sorry Boy, Squiggles420, SS1234L, and Edgy McGee. On the YouTube channel member side of things, we have James Meador, Corbin King, Kyle S., This Old Planeswalker, TKs-Gimper, Matt Jordan, Triumph, Mark05790, Mark Train, James Starkey, Craniac Gaming, Combat Carl, Skull and Suit, Sean Johnson, and Coffee is Good. And ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to who I call the Tag Team Champions of the world. These are people that donate $5 on Patreon and are a YouTube channel member. They are as follows: Fireflare, Nero, Jay of the Jungle, Clay395, Bob Hunt, and Lisbeth. Thank you so much for your support. I wouldn't be able to do this without you, and I hope to see you on the next one. It's been Mantis.
I gotta testify. Come up in the spot looking extra fly. For the day you die, you gon' touch the sky. You gon' touch the sky, baby girl. Testify. Come up in the spot looking extra fly. For the day you die, you gon' touch the sky.